In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Lord Jesus Christ, we thank you for giving us the gift of our bodies. We thank you for giving us the gift of marriage and of life. We ask you to watch over us now. Show us the gift that comes through our Lord Jesus Christ to redeem our bodies. And help us to be vigilant and courageous to stop the scourge of pornography, to know about it, to understand it, to address it prudently, wisely, and in light of faith and charity. We ask this through your holy and saving name. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Good evening. Thank you all for being here this evening and for sacrificing the time to be with us. I would like to thank Father Andre Joseph, who is not able to be here with us tonight, and Sister Mary Aquinas for making this program possible, and thank you for your support. I would also like to thank the St. Gertrude School Advisory Council for their hard work in putting together this event. Finally, I would like to thank our panelists for offering their time and their expertise. We're going to begin this evening with an introduction of the panelists, and then they will give their comments, and then we will open up the floor to question and answer. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce our first panelist, Courtney Brown. Courtney is a Theology of the Body Education Coordinator at Ruah Woods in Cincinnati. He has 15 years of youth ministry, teaching, and retreat experience. Courtney is a frequent speaker to teens, challenging them to live lives of chastity and authentic love. He has a BA in theology from Franciscan University of Steubenville, Ohio, and an MA in theology from Our Lady of Holy Cross College. Our next guest is Dr. Andrew Sodergren. Dr. Sodergren is a clinical psychologist at Ruah Woods. He holds master's and doctoral degrees in clinical psychology from the Institute for the Psychological Sciences in Arlington, Virginia. Dr. Sodergren also holds a master's degree in theology from the John Paul II Institute for Studies on Marriage and Family in Washington, D.C., where he also serves as adjunct professor. He has given presentations at several professional conferences and on the integration of psychology and the Catholic faith. Dr. Sodergren and his wife, Ellie, have 4 children, 3 on earth and 1 miscarriage. Our third panelist is Jen Giroux. Jen is a registered nurse for 29 years who has worked in the pro-life movement at the local and national level for 30 years. Jen developed an educational program for parents in Catholic schools to help keep their children safe on the internet. She is the former CEO of One More Soul and has also worked with Human Life International as founder and executive director of HLI America. Jen and her husband Dan have 9 children, and they run the Catholic shop here in Madeira. And last but not least, I'd like to introduce you to Father Ezra Sullivan. Father Ezra serves as assistant pastor here at St. Gertrude Parish. As a Dominican friar, he has received a Master's of Divinity degree from the Pontifical Faculty of the Immaculate Conception, Dominican House of Studies in Washington, D.C. Father Ezra has published articles in both scholarly and popular journals. When he is not serving at the parish, Father Ezra likes to give retreats and spiritual reflections around the country. At this point, I'd like to turn things over to Courtney.
Thank you, Debbie. Listen, I'm going to get us started tonight, so it's kind of awkward. Talking about an awkward topic, I guess, in some respects. But my name is Courtney Brown. I work at a ministry called Ruah Woods. We basically dedicate our lives to helping families and teaching the theology of the body. As Debbie said, I have about 15 years of youth ministry experience. And I started doing youth ministry stuff when I was in college. So I'm not that old, I don't think yet, but I mean, the kids are starting to let me know. And I'm getting up there, especially when I quote movies they have not seen. However, one of the things that I've noticed today is that teen behavior really isn't so much different as it was when we were growing up or when you were growing up. It's just now, there's just so many other ways in which people can have access to our teens and to our children. And it's via the internet. It used to be where you had control who had access to your home, who came into your house, who was your kids hanging out with. Well, because of the internet, now 6 billion people can hang out with your kids, and we don't even know it. Now, I'm not trying to scare you about the internet and go home and be like, no more internet. No, that's not the point. But the point is to be aware that now we're in a situation where the playground is essentially the world. And just as much as teens, if you remember, I don't know specifically the history of this, but we always had ways to communicate. When I was in high school, instant messaging I had dial-up, which I know that some of you are like, oh, that was really fast. Today, you ever notice today that DSL and stuff, you get mad at your computer as if it's controlling itself or has a mind? You know what I mean? You just get mad at it. It's just slow. Well, kids if you show them your typewriter, they would know I'd be a foreign object. It belongs in a museum to them, and at least in their mind. Well, we had beepers. You remember pagers? I had to get a beeper. I had to get one. It was like I needed it bad. And when I got it, it became the most aggravating tool in the universe because it would beep in the most odd times because you had to beep someone to call. So it was like and kids, just as they put LOL, BFF, you would try to find ways to put that in the beeper. Like 143 meant I love you. It's a very fun way to say I love you to someone. But however, I remember normal teen behavior in terms of like figuring things out, discovering our bodies, and stuff like that, now has become inundated with speed and hedonism together. So things like Facebook have made it really difficult for us to really monitor who our kids are talking to. Now, just to give you some statistics to get your mind to what I'm talking about here, is that right now, the average teen texts 110 messages, receives and gets, and sends out 110 messages a day. And you may be thinking to yourself, oh, that's not that much. That's exactly what the teens tell me. Every time I tell them, they're like, oh, I text more than that. It's like, do you do the math there? That's over 4,000 texts. Well, close to 4,000 texts a month. Most of you don't even talk to me that much. You know, and the thing is 110 to them doesn't seem like a lot, but they're not on their phone the whole day. So you can only imagine they're on their phone the whole day. What can happen? But what's going on with the texting, and I've been doing more and more research and understanding why teens this is their lifeline now. Texting has become their mode of communication. I think we should tell them to stop, don't get me wrong, because it's hard for them to interact humanly. But at the same level, texting is becoming their first mode of operation. For example, I need to get mom's answer on something. Mom, can I go here? They text you, right? And then I even with my wife, if I'm in a meeting, I'm glad there's such thing as text. Because then I can text her and not bother everybody else by calling her on the phone. But I probably should put the phone away, right? However, when it comes to depressing things teens are struggling with, I don't get a phone call from them. I get a text. So sexting is almost an exact, I don't know what the word I'm looking for here, but texting is in a way, it shouldn't alarm us in the sense that, oh, why would they ever text us? It is the way they communicate. So now, when they text and sext, this is what they're used to doing. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it's good. I'm just saying that we shouldn't be shocked that they discovered this in Skyping. Now, that you only can imagine what's going to go there. And then when they create holograms on the phones and stuff like that, because that's coming to a theater near you as well. These are the technology is only going to become a means by which they communicate. So educating our kids on the dignity of the body and understanding the sacredness of our body and the sacredness of our words, and that we don't just emotionally throw ourselves out there through these public means which they think is private. They think the internet is private. So it's like you can't read their diary. No, this is anybody could read your Facebook post. This one girl, if you go on Facebook, you see a list of news feeds, which means news, share your news. What's news today has become the burger they're eating at In-N-Out restaurant or something. But this one girl said, someone please text me. Now that goes to every one of her friends and to me, and then if I comment on it, that now goes to all of my friends. So now this girl has put herself out there in public and thinking it's private. The other thing I want to mention too, middle school, the number one age group right now, the number one age group that is joining Instagram, where you take a picture and share your picture, innocent Instagram, the number one age group right now is middle school. It's a social site. They can communicate with other people on the social site. Internet gaming is becoming another way in which kids are being exposed to people who they never meet. And you know what I'm talking about. They put on the headset and they start talking to people and random and they play Assassin's Creed 84 or something like that. They are communicating. So social media has become our new playground that our kids are going to play in. And we're having a hard time doing that. So when I've noticed in pornography, when I was in high school, the internet was starting to be the source. TV was still the source, but now, as they go on YouTube and Facebook, there's these ads that just get on. They're just inundated with these ads of just stuff. And it's just a click of a button, and now they're thrown into a porn site. Or they're thrown into something that's a starter site. And one of the things that I heard from a speaker, his name is Matt Fradd. And what Matt Fradd does is Matt Fradd goes around the country and talks about pornography, especially the high school students. And this one woman came up to him and said, well, I don't have a porn problem in my house. We don't look for porn. And Matt Fradd responded and said, yes, you may have in your house safe and you don't look for porn, but know this, porn is looking for you. And porn is looking for your kids. So you coming tonight is very valuable. You coming tonight to learn better ways to be safe and learn how to educate your kids and try to keep them safe and educate them on the dignity of their body and have that communication is just awesome. The other thing, too, I want to mention is that, this is something that I see and come across a lot. I do a lot of counseling at retreats. Kids come up to me and ask for prayer and ask for help. And pornography is up there. Drugs is up there, too. But they kind of go hand in hand in a certain respect. Pornography, and the other one that a lot of people don't particularly like to mention, especially boys, because it causes a little gut check, if you will. Couldn't do one of these things, is masturbation. And that definitely is a huge part of the porn problem. Sexting is a part and a direct effect because of pornography. The thought of a kid saying, I'm going to take a picture of myself and send it to everyone else and not cognitively know that this is a problem means something else is going on. So we're here tonight to kind of talk about these issues as parents, to come up with good ways, and also if we find ourselves struggling, how do we talk to people? How do we talk to our kids? How do we talk to our brothers or sisters or our uncles? Or if I'm struggling with it, what is the best ways to overcome these things and the best ways to deal with them? So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Sodergren and allow him to give us some information as well.
Thank you, Courtney. I'm going to try to be a little bit brief, just to make sure we have plenty of time for question and answers. So I think that's going to be perhaps the most valuable time tonight. And because I'm a little under the weather, I don't want to talk very much. Just a little bit by way of my own experience with this whole area. As a psychologist and someone who's worked solely in Catholic-based settings, starting in graduate school and my postgraduate training and then presently, I've come across problems with pornography and sex addiction quite a bit in my clinical work. When you sort of advertise yourself as a Catholic psychologist, you kind of draw a lot of those sorts of issues because there aren't very many places where people feel they can go for help where their faith and their moral values are going to be respected, right? Psychology is a very secular profession, and so if someone is a devout Christian and they're having a problem with pornography, they don't want to go to a psychologist who's going to tell them that it's okay, you don't have a problem, maybe your problem is your religion or a guilt issue or whatever. So starting as a graduate student, then I had to kind of learn sort of trial by fire a little bit how to help people who were dealing with pornography addictions of various kinds. And over the years, I've had more opportunities to do some study and research into this. And as Debbie mentioned earlier, I do teach at the John Paul II Institute. And one of the topics that I address there is this whole area of pornography and sex addiction. So I just want to share a few things here initially about some of the research I'm familiar with in that area. And then as time permits later on, maybe in the Q&A, I'll mix in some other things as they're pertinent. So first of all, pornography has been around a long time, a lot longer than the internet per se. But the internet really was a game changer. And it may be sort of obvious to say that, but it's useful to just kind of take a step back and think about why that's the case for a moment. Before the internet was around, if someone wanted to access pornography, you had to go to a brick and mortar type of place and you had to pay for it. So that meant risk of exposure. People were going to see you. There's costs out of your pocket, and it's inconvenient. Well, all of that changes with the internet. One researcher refers to the AAA engine of internet pornography, and that refers to accessibility, affordability, and anonymity. So accessibility, affordability, and anonymity, meaning that you can access it from anywhere, especially now with our iPhones, and literally anywhere. So accessibility is completely a non-issue now. Affordability, there's so much free content out there that, again, money's not a hindrance anymore either. And now anonymity, nobody needs to know, right? So unless you have a strong moral conscience, why not? I mean, that's really the question that we need to ask ourselves, is why not? Why should people not be looking at this stuff? Because all the traditional barriers have basically been taken away. And when we think of it in those terms, it starts to make a lot more sense about why so many people get sort of embroiled in internet pornography addiction. All right. Now, it's difficult to come across good, reliable statistics about just how prevalent internet pornography really is. But we do have some good data on the frequency of how often it gets used among certain populations. I'm going to share a few quick research studies with you. One study that was conducted about 5 years ago of 800 college students showed that about 2/3 of the young men in that survey thought viewing pornography was okay. So about 2/3 of the young men said porn was okay, and about 50% of the women thought that it was also okay. Okay? So this is a sort of typical 800 college students from about 5 years ago. In that same study, about 69% of the men reported viewing pornography at least once a month. And about half of the men viewed it weekly or more, with about 5% viewing it daily or almost every day. All right, and again, this was 5 years ago, probably before iPhones and stuff were as prevalent as they are now. But those figures I've seen are fairly consistent from the studies published around that time period. A similar study, this one from Canada, of a large group of college students, again, had similar figures. About 3/4 of the men in that study said that they had used porn in the last year, and about 6% of them used porn and masturbated daily. So a couple things we can learn from this. One is that it's very, very widespread, but there is quite a bit of variability in terms of how often people are immersed in this. It seems like a lot of people use it some, and a few people use it a lot. And the concern is that few is growing and getting bigger, and it's getting harder and harder for those people to get out of the pornography trap, because, as I said before, so many of the previous barriers and things that helped deter people are all taken away now. Okay. An earlier study of teenagers showed that the average age of first exposure to pornography was age 11. Now that study was about 10 years ago. I would suspect it's probably a little bit earlier now, but it was a rigorous study, and they were trying to specifically focus on kids who were regular internet users. So it may be a little bit earlier now, but I'm not sure if it's a whole lot earlier. But nonetheless, we should be thinking around probably age 9, 10, 11 is when the average kid these days is exposed to pornography. And in the old days, it used to be, exposure to a magazine they found somewhere or something like that. Nowadays, it's probably, something on the internet or something on somebody's phone. Now, what tends to happen with kids when they first get exposed to it is that there often is a kind of disgust or shame sort of response, which is a wholesome thing. But there's also often curiosity. And if they don't have someone to talk about it with, or they don't have a way to understand what's going on and their reaction to it, they may give into the temptation to go back and explore more to try to figure this out. Because, as I'll talk about later, probably in the Q&A, the experience of viewing pornography creates a whole cascade of effects in the human person, including things at a neurochemical level in the brain, especially for males. And that's a lot for any person to try to understand, especially for a child. All right. Let me just say a couple more things, and I'm going to conclude my sort of introductory remarks here. As a profession, psychology and mental health in general has not agreed upon sort of a definition of pornography addiction or broader cyber sex addiction or anything like that, or sex addiction, period. There's been a growing consensus in the field that such a disorder does exist, but our various governing bodies have not yet deemed it wise to classify it as an official diagnosis, which I think is just hogwash. Because obviously there's a lot of people suffering, and if you look at what's going on, it follows very much the classical patterns of other types of addictions. And we know more about even, as I said, the neurological mechanisms underlying these behaviors. So the good news is, though, is that we've been studying addiction for a long time, and there are things that can be done to help people to overcome these problems and to experience freedom again. And of course, with the liberating power of God's grace, all things are possible. And so, part of why we have this panel together tonight is to sort of share our resources, our collective experiences about what works in terms of gaining freedom from pornography and sex addiction, but also how we can help prevent it in our lives and in our children.
As I was listening to the introduction, it occurred to me that I could be the mother of all three of these sitting at the table. And so tonight, age comes before wisdom, okay? Especially listening to all their degrees, because claim I could have a BS degree, but it doesn't stand for what theirs stands for. So I really kind of bring the parental aspect to this, and I'm going to just share a few practical things from my perspective, saying first of all how difficult parenting is and how I absolutely don't do it perfectly, and all these things I'm telling you are daily struggles for all of us in terms of our children. So around Christmas time, we had a little shake up with getting a computer and phones and stuff like that were free. Yeah, we bought into that stupid thing. So I sent an email January 1st to my kids, which made it to my older kids, and they were laughing so hard, but I basically said to all my kids in their email, to my 5 youngest children, please email me back by 5 p.m. this evening the following: the 4-digit password on your cell phone, the password to get into your Gmail and school account, the password to access your Facebook. No protest, please. I've asked you for this before. If you don't cooperate today, I will ask for your cell phones and we will remove all Facebook pages. Love you, Mom. So my one daughter forwarded to my older kids in their 20s and said, Mom's losing it. That's okay. When I had the opportunity, I worked for Citizens for Community Values back in 1997 and 96 with Phil Burris and Vicki Burris, who do a phenomenal work in the city and nationally against pornography. Phil is a recovered addict to pornography. And I learned a lot there. That's a lot. And I set up a school program in the Catholic schools on internet pornography and keeping your kids off of it. And Brother Joe at the time allowed me 5 minutes in front of all the principals. So some of the schools invited me in. So that's what I want to share with you. All the schools have the problem. I will tell you, at my first presentation, which is a feeder school to this school, a boys' school that will remain unnamed on North Bend Road, this vice principal stood up and said, okay, before we let them come up, and I just want to share with the parents, we've done a little bit of polling in the school. All of the boys are looking at pornography all of the time, and we can't get a handle on it. We'll keep you posted. And then sat down. And I wanted to go, what? You know, but everyone was sitting there very calmly. And so I thought, okay, I'm an invited guest, so I'm going to stay composed. And I went up and started to talk about what I went to tell them. And I was amazed to find how, when the discussion opened up, parents were saying, we don't know what to do about this. If it's alcohol, we can get them help in alcoholism. If it's drugs, we can do that. If they're a discipline problem, we got military school options. We don't know what to do with this. Well, the reality is, it's true. I myself, as a parent, my older kids went to Moeller, and I have always talked very freely with my kids, and they said, Mom, the real good guys can hack through any of the filters. They can get on pornography at school anytime they want. Sorry, I see a few Moeller teachers here. It's just a reality that they were born with a gene none of us were born with. None of us were born with. And so, one of the things that I wanted to share with you, which shocks a lot of parents, is that there is technology out there that allows you to read your kids' emails without them knowing it, have alerts sent to your email if certain language or words are used in any of the email or Facebook. I'm not endorsing any brand. We use Be Secure online, and only because that was what CCV promoted at the time. There's a lot of different ones out there, so I'm only talking from the experience that I have. But I was a big advocate that I did not want students here tonight, as we were talking on email today, because I think that what I saw in the schools is parents going, well, you know, isn't that violating my child's privacy? Yes. It is violating your child's privacy, and God wants you to violate your child's privacy. And that is a concept that most parents cannot get their arms around. One mom, not in the city of Cincinnati, told me that she struggled with looking at her daughter's mail and email, but she knew something was terribly wrong. She did it and found that she was into Satan worship with her friends. So God wants us we're going to live in a society that's telling us that children have all these rights, when in reality, our parental rights are what helps form our children's souls. And it is our job to make sure we protect them. And so there's a story that I always told when I talk to parents about, true story about a little girl that was home after school a lot by herself and found a friend on the internet. And every day would get on and talk with this friend on the internet that lived, in another state, and found this very nice friend. And months went by, and in the course of that time, this friend knew when this child was home alone, where the parents worked, when the parents were home, the likes and dislikes of the child, their activities. And one day, at a baseball game, she was in center field, and there was a strange man over by the fence, and he was watching and waving at her, and she was waving back, and went home that evening, and her parents, a little bit later, called her out into the living room, and there's a strange man there. And they said, have you been talking to Brandon on the internet? And she was startled. And she's like, yeah, it's my friend. He's 14, just like me. And they said, well, meet Brandon. He's a police officer that's been chatting with you for months. And he told the parents everything he knew in their lives. And it was a great example, because this unsuspecting girl had told this friend so much. And so it seems like a giant, but so many people are braver on the internet, present themselves as something that they're not on the internet. And of course, everybody saw that bizarre story of that football player that supposedly didn't know that he was talking to a girlfriend that didn't exist. How crazy is this world? So, I guess what you got to look at is what tools are available to us as parents, number one. And there is this type of thing, online filtering, that allows parental monitoring on the web, social networks, text, email, integrated mobile filtering. And just to let you know, it's for about $49.95 for 3 devices. So if you have 3 computers, you can download it on 3 computers. If you want to download it and have it on your kids' phones or whatever, you can also do that. But I can tell you more about that afterwards or give you some guidance on that. But it's really great. Now, it's a little bit of a hassle because, like, I like to look at news sites and it will block out Drudge Report, for instance, because Drudge Report will link to things that, kids shouldn't see. So you have a code. You have about 30 seconds to put your code in to override it. And you just got to make sure your kids don't know the code. But, so just a couple other thoughts I'm going to give you is that many people don't realize that unsuspecting families and young children can be exposed to pornography on vacation. And so kids go in unsuspectingly to this wonderful hotel and they're all excited, they turn the TV on, and there is horrible, 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 horrible pornography. And when I started at CCV at the interview, they're like, have you ever seen a pornography film? And I'm like, no, is that a requirement to work here? They said, no. But what they had to do was tell me what we were dealing with in particular films. And so, just a little FYI, there is a site called cleanhotels.com, and I'm happy to say Marymount Inn, Hannaford Suite, up across from the back of the mall, and a number of others do not carry pornography. If you go to that website, you can put in the state and the zip code where you're visiting. It will tell you all the clean hotels. And it's great to support them and tell them you're supporting them in that way. And that is, the sad thing is when new hotels go up, these people that have sell the pornography stations give all the hotels in the hotel, all the rooms in the hotel free TVs, but they have to take their package, including adult pornography. So that's just a little FYI on that. Another thing is, I had one boy tell me that he was exposed to pornography mostly on overnights in junior high. So that's a very big heads up to parents because kids stay up late in overnights, and if they have free access to the computer and all that, it's very hard to know unless you really are good at checking the history and everything like that, what they're doing, what they're looking at. And that's not to say, you don't trust us. But I say, yes, I do, but you know who Ronald Reagan is? He said, trust but verify. And that's really good to do with our kids at all ages. And so, it's really super difficult because, statistics tell us if kids were born after 1990, no, I'm just kidding. 97% of those kids play video games. 75% or more have cell phones. Instant messaging, social networking sites, and all that. It's an electronic world that quite honestly is frightening. It is frightening as parents. It is frightening for the formation of their souls, future relationships. It's very. I had a priest tell me that a little 5th grader cried talking to him until he threw up because he was addicted to pornography and didn't know how to tell his parents. This is happening among us. And I don't think any parent, myself included, should be naive enough to think our children are above that, because they're exposed to so many things that we don't know, and using tools like Be Secure, another one, is one step to put in place. The placement of the computer in the home is a very significant thing, so they don't have access themselves on that. I myself feel like the pendulum's going to swing back. Personal opinion, there's no reason these kids need a laptop on the back in high school. I think that'll swing back around to not occurring, but that gives them too much access to that laptop alone. So a few basic rules like time on the computer, where it's placed, and things like that, and having the passwords can really be great weapons. But I will close and say, most people don't hear the term custody of the eyes. When it's a church term that was often used in years past, but custody is, in control of or in the care of. Custody of the eyes is really important to tell your children, because you're not going to always be able to keep them from a situation unpredictable where they'll see something, but you can help form their conscience so they look away, so they protect their own innocence. Even telling them, you might be curious to look, but it can damage you. Tell them that when you look at pictures that are awful, that are pornographic, and that are nude, a chemical in your brain is released, they now can tell us, that makes it a very addictive thing to want to do. Arm your kids with this knowledge so that they at least have the tools to fight with. And I will close by saying the most important tool that we have are the spiritual weapons. Family rosary, and the Eucharist, of course, going to Mass as a family. I oftentimes pray, if I'm praying for my children, distract them in thought and have them look away if something's going to be said or done that could damage their soul. So it's any time in life something like this, which is very overwhelming, starts to make you feel demoralized, that is Satan. Here's our most effective weapon that we can use to protect our children. Thank you.
Dr. Sodergren brought up a point. He said that some of his psychological colleagues have not defined pornography. And he says it was hogwash. And part of this is because they are perhaps in that culture. I'm going to talk just a moment from a theological perspective. As a Catholic priest, I have a unique access into people's interiors. And perhaps, like Dr. Sodergren, I've seen this in a number of different venues. But I want to talk about, before we get to that, I want to talk about what is pornography. And I'm going to suggest that it is a culture. Okay? It's not simply an object that we can choose to look at or not. Pornography as the explicit portrayal of the marital act. Sometimes people might define pornography as that way. John Paul II said famously, the problem with pornography is not that it reveals too much, but that it reveals too little. And what he means is that it's not showing the dignity of the persons. Okay? That's true, and it's a cultural problem. It's not simply that people are looking at a video or an image and then they're attracted to this video or image and they get addicted. That's true. But the question is, how did this come about in the first place? How did people make this? How did they come to desire it? And then how is it pushed in the culture? I'm going to suggest that it started with a lack of chastity in general. And in fact, it was the separation of two essential aspects of the marital act, namely the procreative and the unitive act of the marital act. Okay? So once people start to have this notion that you can separate sexuality from marriage, and you can separate sexuality from procreation from children, this actually makes pornography possible. It's a cultural choice. You're saying the people who make this and the people who are involved in it, the so-called actors, right, those who are photographed, already they're going to be engaging in the act. They don't want children to come about from the photos. They don't want a child to come about from the activity that they're performing on a video. These people aren't married. It's a cultural choice. The people who are filming it, it's a cultural choice for them too. They're trying to promote a sort of way of thinking about the human person. And they're trying to not only get you to pay money, it's largely due to greed, but it's also to have you think in a different way, to look at other people in a different mode, in a pornographic mode. We know that this is a cultural issue because of how people dress. I got an email from a mother recently, and I'm sure most mothers can recognize this, mothers of girls. She went to, a normal store in the mall, looking for clothes for her daughter. Her daughter's a teen. And she said she went to the store, and not one piece of clothing, except for maybe the shoes, was modest. Not one piece of clothing could she feel like her daughter could wear to church. There's been a problem sometimes that people come to us priests and they'll say things like, Father, girls are dressing really immodestly in church, and it's distracting when I'm trying to go up for communion. And what happens is Father tries to talk to the family and they get really defensive and they say, well, that's my daughter you're talking about. That's true, and this is why I'm concerned. It's a pornographic culture that is now seeping into the very way people dress, the way people dance. Have you been to a high school dance? I don't suggest it. it's really hard to even go and be a chaperone or something like that and keep your eyes pure. In fact, to go there and not to have immodest thoughts. Because the way they're dressing is actually quite similar to the way prostitutes dress. Let's be honest, okay? There was recently an article about this, in fact. I don't remember the city, but there were prostitutes who made a formal complaint to the city that they said, well, we want the girls to stop dressing like us because our business is going down. That's really disturbing. And it's true. And so it's a cultural choice. And this culture of pornography exists not only in dances and in dress, but it's in movies as well. In fact, the way that they portray women now in movies, they've actually taken film techniques from pornographic movies. The way they focus in on certain parts of the body, the way they portray the marital act. It's becoming more and more explicit. Did you know that once upon a time in a movie that they weren't actually allowed to show a kiss? Whenever you would see the kiss, you would always see the back of the heads of the man and woman. Why? Because this is something that's preserved to man and woman. Man and wife. Okay? Nowadays, it's, what, really? Okay? So this culture is slowly encroaching. And we're not even aware of it as much. We're so used to trying to pretend it's not there. We're so used to seeing it that we're immersed in the culture ourselves. It's almost as if we live in a city with really bad air. If you live in LA or something like that, you just get used to the fact that there's sort of this brown smog over you. You get used to the fact that you can't run very far because your lungs are weak. And if you go to a place, that's up in the mountains and is free of smog and whatnot, you're like, well, what happened? What happened to the sky? You don't realize you've been living this way your whole life. And so this is now what we're engaging in, is that contrary even to our intention, we're living in a pornographic culture. And our children not only accept it as normal or normative, now they accept it as a mandate for their own interaction with each other. So children, of course, they're going to accept the culture in general, and then they're going to try to, one-up it. They're going to, try to go as far as they can. And so not are they going to dress a certain way, not only are they going to watch movies and appreciate the music that's of a pornographic culture. Did you know that many pornographers are actually, what they do is sort of like a side extra money making, is they make music videos. This actually started with Britney Spears, that some of her early music videos, controversially, were filmed by a pornographer. Isn't that interesting? Oh, let's watch Britney again. And what is this telling us? Well, it kind of caught on, and now this is something pretty popular for most people. You see a woman, in many of these music videos, and they're not portraying her in a way that shows her dignity. They're not showing the men in a way that's masculine. This is all part of a culture. Probably most people are aware that this culture is seeping into our high schools. We've heard different examples of this. In the Mesa High School, probably many people heard the public high school, there was a sexting problem, there was a bust, and they discovered that hundreds of students were sending nude photos of themselves to each other. Hundreds in this high school. You think it's just located in just the Madeira Public High School? Let's not be naive. This is a cultural problem where everybody thinks it's okay. This is how we communicate now, and this is how we find fun and pleasure, and this is how I find meaning in my life. If I don't do it, then people think that I'm not worthwhile. Now I feel excluded. Suddenly when I'm trying to be chaste, or even just slightly less lustful, I only have sex with people who I really love. I only perform oral sex. I don't actually have real sex. These are the sorts of things that people will say in order to try to preserve some sense of dignity. Okay, so I think that for parents, we have a couple of things that parents need to be honest about in terms of their participation in this culture. First of all, it's what I would call a culture of competition in the modern realm. And they're very tempted to have to sort of live up to the Joneses. Well, these kids have laptops, these kids have cell phones, and I really want them to, I don't want my children to be shamed by not having their laptop or cell phone. They're probably going to give it to them. That's really naive, and what you're doing is you're putting human respect above the good of your child's soul. So in addition to the culture of competition, there's also parents' active participation in the culture of pornography. whether it's parents themselves looking at pornography, and then it sort of leads to a mindset that accepts this more, or if it's parents who don't enforce modesty for their children. Either, their sons telling dirty jokes, their daughters dressing modestly, and then many of the things that Mrs. Giroux said. So we have, a participation in this also. And that's to say nothing of the explicit participation, where some parents, of course, are offering condoms and so on to their children to help them on their road to destruction. So the thing I'd just like to say, of course, and it's worth saying, is that the church recognizes the goodness of the human body. Artists have portrayed the human body, clothed and unclothed, in various depictions. And in fact, it was somewhat scandalous when John Paul II had the Sistine Chapel renovated by an architectural and painting firm, and he took the fig leaves off of the private parts of the paintings, the figures in Michelangelo's painting. And so people said, well, those fig leaves went up for a good reason. And he says, but I'm taking them down to show people that the human body does have a dignity that's not erotic. And sometimes it's so difficult for us to see that now. Any kind of intimate relationship starts to tend toward the erotic already. Is it even possible to have a friend that's not a friend of Eros? That's the pornographic culture that John Paul II is trying to push against in his own way. So I think I've said enough about the culture of pornography, and we can just say then during the question and answer period, I might be able to talk about, from theological and a moral perspective, how to overcome that culture in your own life and in the lives of those under your care. Thank you.
Thank you, panelists, for your comments. We're going to begin the question and answer period now. And I will just begin with a couple of questions to kind of get the ball rolling, and then please feel free to come up as you have questions. My first question is for Father Ezra. You were talking from a theological perspective. I was wondering if you could elaborate on the effects of pornography on a person's soul.
We can say, first of all, that pornography is addictive to the body, as Dr. Sodergren pointed out. And in fact, the effect of being addicted to pornography can have the same effect as being addicted to certain types of drugs. Okay, so your body remembers, your body has certain responses. Sometimes these are images that can never be eradicated. That's all from the level of the body, and then we can say the imagination. The level of the soul, however, is deeper. And we know that those who struggle with addiction, and especially in the pornographic realm, they start to have a lower self-esteem. They start to find it more difficult to approach the dignity of others in a reasonable way. And we know that, of course, looking at pornography in itself is a mortal sin. It's something that, looking at it just one time, it's enough to separate you from God eternally. So it has all these layers of effects. And if someone is a Catholic, they're going to have a little bit of guilt about this. But then as time goes on, that guilt might lessen because of the effect of being addicted. I don't mean that the guilt per se is less, but the feeling of guilt is less. So the effect on the soul overall is it darkens the mind. It makes it more difficult for us to see the truth about the human person. It weakens the will, so it's harder to really love the good in other people, love the good in ourselves. You know that looking at pornography is often correlated with either violence towards oneself or with these low feelings of self-esteem. And then on the emotional level, like I said, it makes it more difficult for you to control your passions. People get really angry. I can't stop myself. Or I get very depressed, or I get really happy, and then I need that happiness again in different ways. So it affects the soul in different levels, and we say they are all negative.
Dr. Sodergren, could you elaborate for us from a scientific perspective on the effects of pornography on the brain, in particular the male brain?
Well, first of all, we have to begin with the assumption that males have a brain. So just humor me for the sake of discussion. This really goes hand in glove very nicely with what Father Ezra was saying, and I'll not bore you with too many of the kind of arcane details here, but I do find this stuff very interesting. And when I spend a lot of time studying something, it's hard for me not to talk about it, so you'll have to just put up with it for a few minutes. So when a person views pornography, especially a male, first of all, the image comes in through the eyes, of course, and through the optic nerve, and very quickly it hits a part of the brain called the thalamus. And the thalamus is connected with a number of important structures deep in the brain that affect things like hormones and other basic bodily functions. And so in a matter of milliseconds, you start to get physiological changes in the body. It's so rapid, and especially for males, because it seems like the male brain has a special susceptibility to visual erotic stimuli. It's like there's something in the lower part of the brain of a male, I think especially a post-lapsarian male, if you will, a fallen human, a fallen man, that makes us on high alert for any kind of sexual stimulation. It's like we're scanning for it, whether we're intentionally or not. There's something lower in the brain that just tends to do that. And so it doesn't take much for us to be exposed to it, and what happens is the brain tends to want to hone in on it and focus attention. And this is in a matter of milliseconds. And then as the nerve signal continues on through other parts of the midbrain, we get to a structure, and this is a little technical, it's called the ventral tegmental area, VTA. And the reason this is important is because it's been found to be involved in basically all addictive processes. It's the part of the brain that is very important in the regulation of dopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter, a chemical in the brain that is important in signaling the anticipation of pleasure. All right. So when we're anticipating some kind of pleasurable activity, we often get a surge of dopamine in the brain coming from the ventral tegmental area. So after just a couple of milliseconds of viewing some erotic image or video or something like that, we start getting this surge of dopamine. And what that does is, again, it helps us to focus in on the image, and it builds a sense of anticipation, right? Making it harder and harder for us to pull our attention away from it. Okay. And this whole process continues. Also, as I mentioned, the thalamus is connected with other structures that help regulate our hormones, and so testosterone tends to increase, which increases our sexual appetite in general. Also, there's the amygdala, which is another structure deep in the brain that has to do with anxiety or tension, and that tends to get activated along with this process. So there's a feeling of tension, but also anticipation. We're anticipating pleasure, we're focused, but there's this feeling of tension. And so now this tension needs some kind of release, right? And all this happens very, very quickly, right? You can see how pornography taps into it and just sort of runs haywire, or hijacks, probably a better word, hijacks these processes. And it doesn't take long for someone to feel totally out of control, like something has been sort of, turned on, so to speak. A train has left the station, and they don't know how to get control back again. As this goes on, you also get the activation of what are called mirror neuron systems. Mirror neurons are neurons in the brain that fire not when we do something, but when we see somebody else do something. It's like it's related to empathy, basically. We're putting ourselves in the other person's shoes. So when a person is watching pornography, you get mirror neuron activation as they're watching the actors perform sexual acts, as if the viewer was involved in those activities. So at a neurological level, in a way, it is like actually doing those things. There's not that much of a distinction between watching it and entering into it that way and actually being a part of it. All right. There is also an increase in a stress hormone, epinephrine. And the reason this is important is because one of the sort of side effects of epinephrine and norepinephrine is that it can intensify memory. So that's part of the reason why pornographic memories are so difficult to get rid of. Because of the strong cascade of neurochemicals that are produced when we view them, the brain absorbs them more readily, and they become sort of emblazoned in the neurocircuitry of the brain. Now, I don't believe that they're there permanently. The brain is a plastic structure, plastic meaning the sense that it can change. And of course, with God's grace, all things are possible. But that being said, they are very, very powerful, and they can be very difficult to let go of. And I say it more of a letting go of. You can't exactly force them away or eradicate them. But I think with God's grace and enough time and healing, the images do fade. All right, now if all of this is accompanied by ejaculation or some kind of sexual acting out, now you get a whole new cascade of neurochemicals and things that take place. The tension is released. There's a new surge of dopamine, but also endogenous opiates called endorphins in the brain, creating a sense of euphoria and pleasure. Also, there are bonding hormones like oxytocin and vasopressin, the same chemicals that promote bonding, for instance, between a mother and a child in childbirth and in breastfeeding, are released during sexual orgasm. And so in the case of pornography, you have all this going on between a person and an image or a device or something that's not even real. And it aids the whole addictive process, the sense of which I need this thing. I'm somehow connected with this thing. I can't live without it. I have a kind of an attachment to it in a very literal sense. All right, so these are some ways in which pornography affects the brain. I'll just say one or two more quick things, so I don't dominate the time too much. And that's that as this goes on and the addictive process sets in, there can be longer-term changes in the brain that take place as a result of this. And some of this we know from studying other types of addictions. So for instance, so much dopamine gets used up in this process that the brain tries to sort of regulate itself so that it doesn't completely deplete its dopamine resources. And what happens then is it downgrades some of the mechanisms that I've talked about. So what that means is that in order to get the same effect, I need more of it, right? Because the brain's trying to conserve its dopamine now. So now I have to get more in order to feel the same way I felt last time, right? So this plays in a paradoxical way into the problem of behavioral addiction. I need more of it. Also, there are some interesting studies coming out on a protein in the brain that affects the way gene transcription takes place. Basically, the way nerve cells are created and the way that they function. That shows that when this particular protein gets turned on, it creates a susceptibility to this addictive process and kind of maintains it. So there's all kinds of things that happen in the brain here that are very subtle but extremely powerful. And once that process gets kicked into place, it's very difficult to shut it off again, which is why controlling what we have access to and what our kids have access to is so very important. And then once we find ourselves slipping down that path, to try to get off of it as soon as possible before these things take deeper and deeper root into the person.
Thank you for that. That was amazing information. Jen, I have a question for you regarding addressing our children. Do you have suggestions for how we can approach the subject with our kids, and specifically, how would you approach the young child versus our adolescents and versus our kids in high school?
Obviously, this is an uncomfortable subject, and for my junior high boys who are now almost 30, I did it going 60 miles an hour in the car when they couldn't get away from me. They had the option of listening or rolling out at 60 miles an hour. So, no, it's really important to pick, alone time, one-on-one, I believe, to address this for children of all ages. And it can be a little uncomfortable, but you have to keep in mind that if you don't address it head on, they're going to only get what they hear from their friends, or God forbid, websites they shouldn't be on, like Planned Parenthood has that Take Care Down There website that walks them through masturbation and other horrible, sinful things. And so it really is a matter of laying some fundamentals in terms of the things and tools that they're going to need to survive when they're tempted as they get older. So like, for instance, I remember reading somewhere how important it is to make your kids wait. And that means sometimes just waiting till tomorrow, till they get something that they want, waiting an hour before they have their snack. Self-control starts at a young age with those little things, so that when they get older and are faced with the peer pressure or having to turn away from things, they're kind of fortified with the self-discipline that they need to be able to do that. And so really it's a matter of at a younger age, and I know most people probably heard this, it's sad, but as young as 4 and 5, you have to and tell them no one ever should touch you where your bathing suit is. Something that basic starts to form a child's, modesty, and modesty is another big thing to continue to talk about, and it's always an ongoing battle. I'm the first one to attest to it, because kids want to wear what is in for everybody, and I am the first one to get my hands around the neck of every buyer in these department stores, because they aren't thinking about anything but revealing fashions and all that. And so, there's like 6 or 7 spin-off meetings that could happen from this meeting tonight, because modesty is a whole other issue. But it really is. And when they get older, as much as it's uncomfortable, boys will oftentimes just go completely silent and be mortified if the mother talks to them, which in my case I have a very shy husband, so unfortunately sometimes I have to do that with the boys. But just do it quickly and let them know, this is what our church teaches, and make sure that you stress that there's no shame in your body, but you have to protect it just like you have to protect your soul. And it's basic conversation like that, and then always leave open the door to telling them, if you ever have to tell me something you saw, something that happened to you at someone's house, you are never going to get in trouble for telling me. You're never going to get in trouble for telling me. And I will tell you, I the only time that I have ever told my kids that they could, have a code is to say they don't feel well, and I will come pick them up wherever they are. Because it's very hard for kids to be in a peer situation and realize and come to the phone and say, well, just come get me because I don't want to be here, and then the friends are going to be mad at them and everything else. So I hope that is a helpful answer, but it's hard sometimes to find that one-on-one time, but you just kind of got to give them the tools they need to come to you if they need to, or know that they can trust you to do that.
Thank you. It's great to get practical advice from a mother. Courtney, it's been a while since we heard from you. I'd like to draw on your experience with the teens. If you could elaborate just a little bit further. You're with these kids one-on-one. Can you tell us just how prevalent pornography is with the teenagers?
It's prevalent. I honestly, the spin-off of what Jen was just saying, my friend Brian Butler, who wrote The Theology of Body for Teens, he's kind of a model father for me in a certain respect, because his kid is 11, so I kind of watched him and then try to implement his strategies and whatnot. But he told me something. We were kind of talking about how these conversations shouldn't just be one time. And I know Jen's not saying that, by the way. I'm not saying that. But she really created a good atmosphere that this is an ongoing conversation. And the real issue is we want to get to why, what's causing this? Like, what's causing people's fascinations with these things that just seem so crazy? Like, the Father mentioned the Madeira case. And that's obviously not the only case. I mean, I've been reading more and more research on sexting. Right now, 28% of teens say they have sexted in one form or a way or another, and that's those who admit it. Teens know how to delete their search engine history. I don't even know how to do that. I mean, I don't. Like, I wish I could tell you how to do that, but they know how to delete it. So even having access to certain things in their phone. So in a lot of ways, you want to do that. You want to have that kind of thing to be able to know what's going on. But what we want to also do as parents is teach them the dignity of their body and the understanding the beauty it is. And modesty is a protection. It's not a church trying to control the way you dress. It's not a church trying to control your bedroom habits. It's a church that cares about your life. It cares about love. And you wearing a certain dress that reveals aspects or parts of your body reduces people to see you as a part. And as Jason Everett coined the term, I don't want to take credit for it, Jason Everett coined it, that the more skin you reveal, especially in the female body, as Dr. Andrew was talking about the male brain, the less you reveal about who you are. And that's true because they've done research, and this was done in Princeton, and Harvard professors got together and put images in front of 22 males, and they were heterosexual males. They had to clarify that. But anyways, they put images in before them of women that were dressed normal, whatever that meant, but then women who were dressed scantily. And the part of the brain that was triggered is the part of the brain where a man manipulates objects. So, as every man could attest, when he sees a woman in a bikini or any of that sort, yeah, he goes right there. He goes to a situation where he is, in a certain respect, manipulating the part of that body. And that's what his brain's doing. So for a woman, dressing modestly, you're not only protecting your own dignity, but you're protecting the dignity of a man as well. And as a married man, with my wife asked me, is this modest? I'm like, well, yeah. You know what? Maybe you should ask another man, because sometimes I'm just too tired to even know. You know, I just do. No, but in a certain respect, my daughters and I've been really trying to instill in them the sacredness of their body. Like I said, ongoing conversation. So for pornography, as Dr. Andrew said, the average age of exposure is 11. I've had kids tell me personally that it was 8. Good kid, good Catholic kid, said he just ran across it innocently at 8 years old. And he felt ashamed and he felt scared. He closed his computer, and it took him 3 years to tell his mom. I think a son should talk to his dad, but if by some chance you're a mom and your dad is shy, and your husband's shy, not your dad, but your husband's shy, then maybe, like Jen said, you approaching it, somebody has to talk to your kids about it. The other thing I want to mention too, it would be, we want to engage at appropriate levels, at appropriate times, and the church talks about when should we talk about sexuality. And in its guide to catechetical human sexuality teaching, it says the age of innocence is from birth to 11, but we know now that innocence is attacked. So from 9 to 11, you kind of want to take it by question basis. Like when they come home and my daughter says, so how does Tobias going to come out of you, Mom? That's a great question. Kelly, you take that one. But that's a question. You want to answer it with the appropriate response and appropriate dignity. However, once they reach 12, that's when you want to start talking about these things and having access to talk about the dignity of the body. Because the real issue is, and what Father Ezra talked about, one of the most important is our culture is very much steeped in consumerism and hedonism. So we're like consumeristic hedonists. So as Jen mentioned, pornography becomes really accessible, becomes easy and attainable, and constantly filling our desires and our passions. That's essentially, we're not forming our wills. So what we want to do with our children is, I think that's brilliant, by the way, not letting them have snack when they want it. I think that's great. And but teaching them, you know what I'm talking about. They get upset when they don't get the right toy from the Happy Meal. Stop stop crying. Anyways, so she is right on there to protect their wills, and it's very prevalent. But it's also, know that your kids are not bad kids. Kids get stuck in this, and they just need help. They need help to get out of it. So if you're a mom and you find your son, don't call every psychologist and freak out. He'll get help. He's going to be okay. We'll get him out. You know what I mean? Because I get that a lot. I do get moms who catch their sons and they're like, my son needs the theology of the body class bad. It's bad. You need to help him. And I'm like, well, that's an awkward conversation. I know why you're in this class. Enough said. So anyways, it is prevalent, but we're working and we strive to help these kids get through it. So.
Courtney, thank you so much. That adds a little bit of levity to this, gives us some hope. And I personally do think theology of the body is the antidote to the culture of death and to all of this. So, does anybody in the audience have a question? Really?
In the 70s, and I know that was a while ago, in the 70s, I was privileged to hear a Congregationalist minister talk about some of these issues, and in his own family. And he remarked that his wife and he were not living as God really wanted them to live, and that God revealed to him that he was reflecting this through his children. His children were acting out, misbehaving. And I was just wondering if how Father might feel about this, that oftentimes that God is not speaking to us through our behavior as adults in the eyes, as we view our children, because to me, it's always seems to be both spiritual, emotional, and physical, this illness of pornography and that's why theology of the body is so beautiful. But sometimes I think that since in this time of Lent, I wonder if it wouldn't be wise for all of us to examine our own conscience about being permissive and using forms of denial to ask God to forgive us, both as a people of God and as a nation.
Thank you for the question. There are a number of things to address there. We can say, first of all, that we know that the actions, the behaviors, the culture that a parent is going to promote is going to be accepted by the child. On the one hand, this is generally the case. What political party are you? What political party was your parents? And if you changed that political party, that probably created some real tension, right? And and they still resent you for it. We know that there's traditions that we hand down to our children, and these traditions sometimes are spoken and sometimes they're unspoken. Certain traditions can be as simple as showing up to Mass late. Sometimes some traditions are praying before meals. Other traditions are things that happen, you think, only in the bedroom between you and your wife, and yet implications start to come about in the way that you treat your wife. Sometimes children are very wise, even though they can't articulate it. They might notice that you're objectifying each other. Okay? I'm talking about contraception. That's part of the issue. Okay, so we know that sometimes the sins of parents end up having implications for their children in ways they don't expect. Nevertheless, we want to say that everybody has autonomy. Nobody inherits a sin from their parents. And in fact, it says very specifically in the book of Ezekiel that's not the case. That we do have the ability to move beyond our past, we have the ability to move beyond whatever we've inherited as a tradition, and to choose the good. So there's always that dynamic. On the one hand, we're affected by our parents greatly, sometimes wounded, sometimes helped, strengthened. And on the other hand, we still have this ability, by God's grace, to move beyond that. And so we want to recognize that both of those are part of the human package. We know that it's true, sometimes God allows the sins of people to affect further generations. He will sort of, allow that to happen. But nevertheless, we don't want to simply make a one-to-one correlation. There have been many saints who have had wicked children, okay? And it has nothing to do with the way they were parents. Sometimes it has to do with the children. Okay.
Do we have any more questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
I always wonder when you get people together like this, what can we do as a community? Every year I get into it with the people at Kroger's over the swimsuit issue. I've talked to the pharmacists in the community about carrying contraceptives and what do they, shouldn't we be passing out natural family planning flyers? And I keep thinking, shouldn't we as a community be more outspoken and watching out for each other? And I'm curious what the panel would say. Because it seems like those days are long past, but it seems like that's how children were protected in the past. People kind of watching out for each other.
Okay, the question is, what can we as a community do? Would somebody like to respond to this? Jen?
First of all, the greatest thing we can do, and I'm convicting myself on this too, is make time for the holy hours that we've been requested even more in the last week with 40 hours of devotion, because I think that we need to re-educate ourselves on how powerful that is. It's easy to get so caught up and so busy that we don't make time for that. And that, again, is our greatest weapon. I agree. I go to Kroger's every time that there's anything like the swimsuit edition, and I ask them to cover it. And I was really happy to see that they had the whole display covered for the swimsuit edition. But in general, I think that we live in a society, and this includes our parish, where perverted sex is acceptable. So we're here talking about what we can do to help and save our children, when in fact, married couples in our own community think it's okay to use pornography for foreplay. And I've heard some devastating stories related to that. And so I think that the overall, this is really great, and I think I wanted to mention that St. X actually formed a task force after I spoke there, not because of what I did, but because of the awareness. And I think that it's better for us to continue to meet like this, and as a group, not just pray, but share our parenting. Because, there's no isolated pornography and sexting and all that. It's all linked together. And I oftentimes discuss with my children that texting is an addictive behavior. And if they, I'll say, I want you to count how many times you try to look at your cell phone. Stop looking at your cell phone, put it away, put it in the kitchen, And it's a struggle. It's so hard as parents. It is so hard because we're busy and there's so much going on, and they say they need it for a ride and everything else. But as a community, I think that these issues are education issues that we are very blessed to have a parish and school that it addresses it.
Thank you. I'm looking at the clock, and I did notice, Anita, you had a question. Did you?
Just about
Okay.
colleges, looking at colleges, what can you do about college? And is it just have your kid go to local college?
Homeschool? Courtney?
Just real brief. I recently met with a kid who his mom was really worried about that. And so we met specifically a couple of times, which was one of those awkward conversations that he came to meet with me specifically because his mom told me what he was doing. But one of the things that we spent time talking about was specifically the dignity of the body. And what is it that you really are looking for? What is it that you truly are desiring? And the answer to that question is fundamentally God. These kids want God. Your children want God. And I specifically showed him, in my way, that how I talk about it, how to do that. And every time you face a temptation, that whenever, specifically when you're tempted with pornography, that, as Dr. Andrew mentioned, it's really difficult. Your brain is telling you something, and then your body wants to feel, and you're dealing with willpower. That I specifically say every time you have a moment of temptation, when you're on the computer, wherever you are, that you need to call upon the grace of Jesus Christ. Without question, don't even think twice. Just keep pray until that temptation goes away. And I specifically like the power of redemption as opposed to the power of repression, as opposed to the power of indulgence. And what I mean by redemption is that if you sit there and say, I'm not going to think about it, I'm not going to think about it, I'm not going to think about it, you're going to think about it. Like, you're just going to think about it. But in reality, if you really sit there and pray that God will untwist your desire here, and slowly but surely over time, and having a band of brothers, getting good friends, tell your son to continue his friendships that are strong in the faith, friendship with his dad, friendship with you, and if he stays connected that way, and that essentially you're praying that God will untwist that desire to love, to authentically love. And from personal experience, he can free you from that addiction. He can certainly free you from that addiction, and he will do it, because he's God, and he's bigger than the sin.
Can I add something on the college thing? College is just a nightmare. Let's be real. They pipe cable TV unfiltered into the dorms. They take your money, but they won't let you look at, or have input to anything that goes on while they're spending your money at the school. You need your child's permission to even see the transcript. It's insanity. But I guess I'll just say personally, I start a lot very young and pray to God that they have the grace. But if you don't teach your kids to say no in grade school and high school, they will not say no in college. So when my kids in high school will, beg me to see an R-rated movie or whatever, I'll say, you know what? I can force you not to see this right now, but if you don't make a good decision now, when you get to college and I'm not watching you, you're not going to make it then. So, one thing we can learn from Planned Parenthood, they always had a 30-year plan, and they executed it well, because our society is a mess because of those demented souls that have followed Margaret Sanger. We have to start literally in first grade in teaching these kids to make the good decisions, back to the custody eyes, back to the saying no, back to self-control and waiting, or else they're going to go to college and do whatever they want to do. And, all we can do when they get to that age is seriously pray that the foundation that they're getting here from us is going to carry them through and help them make the good decisions.
I would say that the chief goal of a parent is that your child go to heaven. That should be your primary goal. You have concern for their souls. And so when you're considering a college, the first thing on your mind shouldn't be, can they get a good job? Are they going to become rich? Can I live off their income? Okay, oh, sorry. It's well, what's going to happen to their soul. Now, there's a tension there, and the tension is between the freedom and the restriction. Now, as Jen just said, when you have children that go off to college, the best thing you can do is have given them virtue. The best way to have an easy conscience is to know that your child is virtuous and trustworthy. And I don't mean naively trusting your child, oh, my son would never do this. The only person who thinks your son is an angel is you, and maybe your son. But most of us know better. And so we don't want to have a naive view of their virtue, but if you've really inculcated them a deep life of prayer, regular attendance at Mass, going to confession regularly, if he falls, he can get up again. These are the sorts of things that can give you a really easy conscience. You can say, I've given him the best that I could in forming his soul in order to make him into a man of God, make her into a woman of God. So that's really the tension there, because frankly, you can't be holding your child's hand. You have to give them freedom. If you try to restrict them too much, they're going to rebel. And so there's always that amount of giving them the freedom that is appropriate given their age and virtue level. So, and ultimately that's going to be what forms them and makes them into adults that you want to be around.
There was one more question. We've got just one more here.
Sorry. When you're talking about the telephones and the computers, one thing I wanted to mention as well as ask about is I've worked with an International Boys Club for quite a few years. One of the things that has come up over the last few years is that this is really starting in grade school, like you mentioned earlier. But it's with things that I didn't know they could have internet on, like the iPod. It's not a phone, it's nothing else, but they've got porn on this in grade schools. And the game stations, you can download Netflix or whatever on those things. I haven't heard about any devices to protect the iPods. And one other comment you made about where does this begin, I can tell you from working with these boys clubs all across that it's starting, probably always has, but it's very much active right now in grade schools, Catholic, public, all across the city, all across this country. And it's not just viewing things, it's engaging in activity. And it's, it happens everywhere. And it's, if the kids don't, one thing that we have to remember, I think, is not only to say what they can and can't see, but not be afraid to tell them that can be your friend and that cannot be your friend. That we have those rights. But I've never heard about any devices to protect these other, all these other electronic things that are coming out.
Is it Be Secure?
Yeah, right. Well, that's the one that I'm aware of, but I know there's a lot out there, but they do now offer something for the Android and the iPhone. And my voice is so loud I don't need them. They do offer that for one or the other. And just a little something I want to add in too is constant struggle. Really try to not let your kids take their phones to bed with them. Because, calls go on during the night. I learned with my older daughter, when they first came in, she was counseling a kid that was suicide to the wee hours of the morning and was stressing her out so much. And I was like, my gosh, I can't believe I was that stupid to not realize that. It was right when cell phones were coming in. So, with all the access to the internet and everything that can be on these phones and everything, and they'll say, but I need my alarm clock. Okay, right. But it's another occasion of sin that you're giving them, and it is a constant battle. But
I just want to bring to your attention this little paper. I put some over there. Has a bunch of resources for protection. The Droid phones and stuff. Be Secure is really good. Another one is Covenant Eyes. Now the way Covenant Eyes works is it's like a band of brothers type system. Basically, two people, you're basically giving someone access to your downloading history. So you have access to what's going on in the person's computer. Now, Covenant Eyes is a Protestant-run organization, very, very, very much steeped into the human sex trafficking issue too as well. So they have a lot of stuff that's going on. Another site that I didn't put on here is purehope.net. That is Jerry Kirk, who's actually the father-in-law of Scott Hahn. That's funny. Anyways, he's a pastor. And his daughter, great family. He formed this alliance with Cardinal Bernardine, and they are now turned into Pure Hope. So that's his organization. Their sole mission is to combat this. There's another website, too, that talking about community things, Fight the New Drug. So there's an awareness on a secular level. There's an awareness, and there's people who are talking on a secular level, going to public schools. So someone like at a public school won't necessarily allow me to come in to talk about it, or like a Matt Frad, Fight the New Drug, has people and presenters, and they use entertainment. They have all these light show stuff. It's great. Anyways, for kids. One of the other things too I want to mention, this all has some reading sources, but one thing for sure that we can always keep in mind is the family, as John Paul II calls us, we have a role to create the sanctuary of life. And one of the missions of us as parents is to teach our children the meaning of self-gift. And that love is about giving yourself to another in a fruitful, authentic way. And teaching them through the phones and through the iPods. And when you're behaving on these things with people. You're interacting with people. And how are you loving them? So in a lot of ways, if you can framework your discussions with that in mind, it kind of can help them articulate, well, you know what? I'm not being a good person per se here, and I'm not loving. So I just wanted to draw your attention to this. And the chastity.com, it has a bunch of resources too. They have a parent's guide on how to talk to your teens about chastity. And Jason Everett's Pornography, Pure of Heart, Breaking Free from Porn. Excellent resource for someone who is struggling and just wants to hear some good talks. Jason Everett has a great CD on that.
Thank you, Courtney. Also, at the top of this page that Courtney has here is a link to a pastoral letter that Bishop Finn from Kansas City wrote called Blessed Are the Pure in Heart. It's a beautiful piece, very comprehensive on the topic of pornography. Panelists, any of you have any closing remarks that you would like to make? Okay. All right, well, let's give a big round of applause. Thank you all again for being here, and please help yourselves to the handouts. Have a good evening.